and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Ridley, and this is my kitchen as I found it. Today, we are going to be doing our second stop in Japan, which I'm very, very excited for because this is a dish that I am very familiar with, but have not made this recipe before. So today, we are going to be taking a look at Tonkatsu Ramen with a little bit of some pork toppings. And yeah, I'm just very, very excited for this because I love ramen. It is one of my very, very favorite things to go out and grab at a restaurant. But it's also something that I've been very concerned about making myself because it seems like it's a lot. Having done a little bit of research, I can say that ramen can be a lot and also can be a little. So if you want to take a look for it, there are a lot of recipes online that are a quick ramen, and you will get a pretty decent, or a pretty good tasting item in about 30 to 45 minutes. That is not what we are doing today. So I am going to be trying to do a more traditional ramen, and what I learned in this process is that ramen is not a recipe in and of itself. It has multiple recipes that you can take a look at along the way. So what I have in front of me is actually 3 separate recipes that we're going to be all putting together to make our Tonkatsu Ramen. Now, a fun little thing that I learned is that if you've ever been to a Japanese restaurant and you see tonkatsu, it is cutlets of like chicken or pork. And that is Tonkatsu, tonkatsu. But there's tonkotsu, which is this type of ramen, and it is literally just a pork broth ramen. So that's what tonkotsu is. So I have pork broth right here as the base for it. And then to make the actual ramen broth itself, we're going to be making a dashi out of that. And so that is going to use a little bit of kombu, which is a type of kelp. And then we've got some ginger and some garlic and some green onions and a little bit of the benishoga from our last time, the pickled ginger. Now this is going to be mostly a topping, but is still going to be super, super delicious overall. For ramen itself, the dish is made of 3 main ingredients, or 3 main steps. There is the tare, which is like a seasoning step, and so for that one, I am going to be using this base right here, which is going to have shiitake mushrooms and a little bit of kelp in it as well, some dark soy sauce, and then we're going to be adding a little bit of, I believe this is called niboshi, but it's dried anchovies. So this is going to give a little bit of that kind of umami richness to it. You've got a little bit of the earthiness from the mushrooms and the kelp. And then finishing it off with, like I said, this is dark soy sauce. So soy sauce can come in regular, and then I've also seen it as dark. Dark tends to be a lot thicker and a lot richer in flavor, and is so going to be the concentrated flavor base for the tare. We are also going to be using chashu, or the traditional topping that I've seen is chashu pork, which is actually a Chinese recipe and uses pork belly. I am going to be using a Japanese recipe which is very similar. It uses pork shoulder instead of pork belly. And the only instructions I had on this was to get some pork belly and tie it into a bundle. So right here, I've just cut a strip off of a pork shoulder, and then I have tied it into a bundle with some twine here just so that it can all stay together in the finished dish. The pork is going to be seasoned with a braising liquid, which is going to be a whole bunch of stuff. So we've got some sake, I've got a little bit of soy sauce, some sugar, a little bit of rice vinegar, and umeboshi plum, which is a super, super sour salted plum. I tried a little bit right before we started filming, and it's intense. I've been told it won't make the pork sour, but it should add a lot of flavor and a lot of depth. A couple of green onions, and then a little bit of ginger here as well. So what I did find is that there's a lot of crossover from the ingredients in the broth, in the pork, and in the tare. All of them use a little bit of ginger, they all use a little bit of onion, they use the kombu, which is that kelp, adds a lot of umami flavor to it. So there's a lot of crossover in the ingredients, but the way you're treating them is going to be very different and gives you tons of different flavors. So what we're going to do is we're going to chop up some of these ingredients so that they are ready to process. We are going to braise the pork shoulder there because that's probably going to be the longest step in the entire thing. While that's braising, we're going to be able to put together the tare with the shiitake mushrooms, the kombu, and everything here. This is going to be the main seasoning of the ramen. And then in the end, we're going to take the stock, we are going to mix that with the seasoning tare, and then we are going to finish that off with the toppings, and that's what makes the ramen. As a fun little fact, The noodles that I'm using here are Chinese wheat noodles, and that is one of the main origin points of ramen. I'm gonna mispronounce this incredibly, but ramen comes from ramyeon, which is a word for Chinese cut noodles. And so that was really where the name came from, and the dish itself sort of came over from Chinese immigrants that were selling it in specific areas. Now it's super, super popular, has tons of different varieties, and we are going to do a tonkatsu ramen with a shoyu tare and a nibuta or nibusha. It is the name of this particular pork dish is going to be the topping. So that is the specific ramen that we are going to be making. I'm very excited. I'm also a little worried because I have high standards for ramen because I've had it very well made for me before, and I'm hoping to get anywhere in that kind of range. So let me prep a couple of things. I'm gonna set some things aside. We're going to chop up some green onions and some ginger, get those prepped and ready, and then we'll move back to the stove and get some ramen together. For our prep step, we're going to start with the pork items. And so this is gonna be a very, very quick setup, because almost everything that we have is going to be just measured out really easily, like the sugar, the vinegar, all of that you can keep in the bottle and measure it as you need to. I've got it pre-measured over here, which is great, so the only thing that I'm gonna need to do is slice the onion and the ginger here, and then for the actual ramen broth itself, we're going to be slicing the onion and then grating the ginger and the garlic. But aside from that, that's really all the prep work that needs to be done over here. So for the onions, we're just going to do some pretty quick thin slices. Now for this, mostly we're going to be using the whites. A little bit of the greens tend to be used for garnish, but definitely the whites are where you get that really nice flavor and crunch and tend to be used in the soup stock itself. My onions are a little bit older, so I've got some that have dried out. I wanna make sure that I'm using those, but I also want really nice crisp veggies in my ramen, so I'm just gonna pull out the little bits that are a little too dry, but everything else is good to go. So we've got these sliced up nice and well. Same thing with the ginger. So this one, I'm assuming you're thinly slicing it to make sure that it has as much surface area as possible, so that way when it's in the braising liquid, it's gonna release all of that flavor. But you don't necessarily want it to be a paste, because that way there's no way to get it off of the finished piece when it's done, and you might end up with too strong of a ginger flavor. At least that's my assumption. So thinly sliced ginger, that will go in there as well. Then for the ramen toppings, on these ones, I am going to keep the whites and the greens separate. Just because I like to have a little bit of the greens for garnish, but the whites make a really great crunchy addition to the actual flavor of the soup, so having them separate allows you to distribute them a little bit differently. It's not gonna make too much of a difference overall, but it'll work. All right, so we've got the thinly sliced onions there, and then we're just gonna grab a microplane grater. If you don't have a microplane grater, a regular one on the smallest holes should do pretty well as well. But we're just gonna grain down these 2 garlic cloves and the ginger as well. And then these get added as a paste to the finished soup to add a kind of punch of flavor to it. All right, so we've got some garlic, some ginger. Now the ginger, it said to use a 2-inch piece. I found that ginger has 3 dimensions, and so using 2-dimensional measurements aren't particularly helpful. I'm gonna be doing an amount, and I hope that it's a decent amount. The piece that I pulled off here is probably closer to 3 inches long, so I'm not gonna do all of it, but I also have no idea what thickness they're intending for that specific piece of ginger to be. I don't want to overwhelm with ginger, but I definitely want to make sure that it's got a present flavor. All right, Butamus. got some garlic, got some ginger, got some green onions. I'm gonna do a little bit more ginger. With this one, you can always add it a little bit at a time, give a little taste, and make sure that you're not overwhelming it along the way. I don't have anything that I can do with this ginger afterwards, so a little bit of extra here is not gonna be a problem. All right, and we've got the sliced ginger, we've got the sliced onions, we've got the sliced onions, we've got the grated ginger, we've got the grated garlic. That's all of our prep steps. So a lot of the items for this, though there are quite a lot of them, you can actually get them in their pre-ready or pre-made version. So I did make my own little noodles here, but I've made these before. You can make noodles, or you can go and grab them from the supermarket. It's not gonna make too big of an issue. Same thing, broth. This is a broth that I had on hand. You can use whatever you would like, as long as you use a tonkatsu broth for this specific type of ramen, it needs to be pork bone. Same thing, you can also even get char siu pork if you would like to not have to make the pork. So if you want to make a homemade ramen, there's a lot of steps of this that you can do pre-made for you. We're going right in the middle between making absolutely everything from scratch and buying some things ourselves. So I am excited to see how this turns out. And it's time for us to move over to the stove, and we're gonna start by cooking the pork, because that's gonna take about an hour, hour and a half to cook. And then when all of that's done, or while that's cooking, we're going to make the tare, which is like the concentrated seasoning. And then once both of those are done, you just mix them all together and you've got ramen. So I am super, super excited. We're gonna move back to the stove and we'll see you in a bit. All right, so to start with the pork, I'm going to put a tablespoon of a neutral oil in here, which I've already got. And I'm gonna get this preheated over medium to medium high heat. You want a little bit of temperature on this one. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna brown all sides of this pork bundle that we've made, just to get a little bit of that Maillard reaction all over it. Then we're going to be adding the rest of the ingredients in, along with some water, and just letting that cook for a long period of time to really infuse all the flavors and make some super, super tender pork. So I'm gonna let this heat up just a bit. It's probably gonna take maybe a minute or so, but not too long. We've got some preheating going on. And I'm just gonna let this one sit for a few minutes to get some browning on that side. Flip it, brown on that side, and I'll probably spend a little bit of time on the edges as well, getting some extra browning on there, because that little bit of, you don't want it to burn, but that browning and that Maillard reaction is gonna add a ton of flavor to this when it's done. All right, beautiful. So we've definitely got a lot of high heat going on here. We've finished all of the searing. So we're gonna finish it off by adding water to cover the meat so that we can thoroughly braise it. And then we are going to add all of our ingredients. And so this is going to make the braising liquid, and then we're gonna cook everything in this super, super flavorful liquid for about 60 to 90 minutes. So we've got the ginger, we've got the onions, we have got the soy sauce, the sake. I'm gonna have a little bit of the sugar here, rice wine vinegar, and the umeboshi plum. So the recipes that I found have this listed, and it specifically says that this will not make it sour, but it's gonna help with tenderizing. So trust the process, I guess. We're going for it. Make sure everything is in here. I'm gonna give it a little stir. Make sure that everything is mixed together for it. Try not to spill as much as I can. And then we're gonna bring this up to a boil, reduce to a simmer, and then let it simmer for 60 minutes. I'll take a look then, see if it's quite as tender as we need it to be, and then if we need to, we can move it a little bit longer in the time, but we're gonna come back to this in about an hour. All right, so we've got everything mixed together. The twine on my pork has actually unraveled. I'm not too terribly worried about that because at this point we've got the browning on it, and we've now got it in the liquid to get the braising going on. So I'm gonna get this up to a boil, which it's actually doing right now. So right when this hits a rolling boil, I'm gonna drop the temperature down to a simmer. I'm gonna cover it up, and then that's what we're gonna leave it as for the next hour. Oh, there we go. So I'm gonna pop this down, cover this up. I know that my stove will tend to continue boiling on 3, so I'm gonna drop it to 2, and then we're gonna set this up for 1 hour. We're gonna come back in an hour, check to see where it's at, and if we need to add more time, we'll add more time then. Ooh, yes. All right, so the pork is underway. So while that's working, we're gonna make the tare, which is gonna be the concentrated seasoning base of this. Now, I am gonna be using a shoyu tare, and if I've learned anything from researching shoyu tare, it's that everybody has a different recipe for this specific thing. So I've mixed a few together to try and get what I think is the best versions of each of them. So what we're gonna do first is I have got some neutral oil, just about a half tablespoon here in the bottom of a pot. I am going to be frying off some of these niboshi, the dried anchovies, giving them a little bit of that browning as well. And then once I've fried them for just a little bit, we're gonna be adding some shiitake mushrooms and some kombu. Now these I've had soaking overnight. The reason for this is because the shiitake mushrooms came dried, the kombu comes dried, and so this right here is a method that they recommended for extracting a lot of flavor from everything. It's not necessarily labor intensive, but just put them into a bowl the night before, just 3/4 cups of shiitake mushrooms and a few pieces of the kombu itself. The kombu, I know if you leave it too hot, if you get it to a boil, it releases kind of like a slimy feeling. So I think that this is a great way to try and extract as much of that umami flavor from the kombu before you actually apply any heat to it, and that way you're much less likely to end up with that slimy, bitter flavor that I've been told about, but I've luckily have yet to experience. All right, so oil is heating up a little bit. I am gonna add these in. We're just going to keep them moving a little bit and get a little bit of browning on them. It'll take a couple of minutes. You do not want to get these super, super hot, super cooked, but you want a little bit of that nice Maillard reaction. Fish. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, so we have our anchovies toasting up. They've got a little bit of browning to them, but absolutely nothing is burned. Don't let anything burn here. We're going to take this, which is the water that has come from soaking the dried shiitake mushrooms and the kombu overnight. This is going to have a ton of that umami flavor and a ton of earthiness. It's just going to have a lot of flavor to it. I'm going to add a little bit more water to top this off. And then the thing that's very important when you're dealing with kombu is to not let it come to a boil. So I am going to be heating this up right before it comes to a boil. I'm going to be pulling the kombu pieces out because they will release a sliminess and a bitterness, I've been told, if they hit a boil, and that is not something that we want in our ramen in this particular instance. We'll get a few minutes of cooking this down. I'm just gonna let it heat up right before the boil, pull the kombu out. I'm gonna boil it, pull all the solids out, and we're gonna be left with a really flavorful liquid. That's when we're gonna mix in the dark soy sauce, and we're gonna reduce it down a little bit until it's the concentration that we want. I have no idea what I'm doing here, but it sounds like a super delicious flavoring base, so we'll see how it goes. All right, beautiful. So we have pulled the kombu from this one because we didn't want it to get bitter. We have brought the shiitake mushrooms and the dried anchovies to a boil, so we're gonna strain those out real quick. All right, and then I am going to do a quick rinse on this pot right here because we're gonna put this back into the pot and reduce it down even more so that all of these flavors get concentrated, because we're gonna be just using a couple of teaspoons of the tare per bowl of ramen. So each one is gonna have to have a big punch of flavor. All right, and then I'm just gonna set this up so that it can start reducing down, and we're gonna get all of those flavors to concentrate very, very strongly. And then once I've got it down, probably another cup or so, I'm gonna add in the dark soy sauce, and that's gonna add that really strong soy element to it. And theoretically, that will be the end of our tare. All right, beautiful. Our tare has cooked down very nicely. So the next step here is to salt it. And so the salt percentage that I was seeing online is we want to aim for 17% salt. This will first of all add a lot of saltiness to it because the broth that I made doesn't have a ton of salt, but then it's also going to preserve it. So we're gonna be able to make this batch of tare, and the tare will preserve really well in the fridge because of all the extra salt content. So we've got almost exactly 600 grams, which is kind of neat. So what I'm gonna do here is 600 grams times 0.17 to give us 17% is 102 grams. Yeah, 102 grams. So then we're gonna zero this out. Get us up to 102 grams, which is a lot of salt. 103, I'm pretty happy with that. All right, butamas. And then I'm just going to stir this up with the stock that we've got so far to make sure that everything is nicely incorporated. And then the last little bit here, I'm going to add the dark soy sauce. And then I'm going to put this back on the heat and just let it slowly reduce until it is to the concentration that I like. I don't know what I'm looking for, but I do know that it's gonna have to have a big punch of flavor to be the main seasoning base for the ramen that we're about to make. So we're gonna take this, back onto here. I'm gonna put it back on a light temperature here and just allow it to continue reducing and increasing in flavor. Let me give it a little taste to see where we're at. I'm gonna assume it's gonna be very strong because that's really what we've been going for, but. Oh wow, that is an incredibly salty punch of flavor. And yet it's got a lot of depth to it. There's some sweetness. I'm very interested to see how this is going to affect the final product. All right, so let me give a quick little stir of this. Make sure all of the salt made it out into the pan, and then I'm just gonna allow it to reduce for a little bit longer. We've got another 5 minutes until we check on our pork, and then at that point we'll be able to see where we're at as far as everything being done. All right, so our pork has been going for just about an hour now. I'm gonna leave it a little bit longer in order to make sure that it's super, super tender. But something we're gonna add at the very last minute here is for the last 15 minutes, I'm gonna add 4 eggs in. And this is kind of a quick version of how to do a flavored egg. So oftentimes you would make a separate cooking liquid for these and do an entirely separate dish. But this recipe specifically has an option to put these in for the last 15 minutes of simmering, so it's not gonna be a full boil. I have no idea if this is going to work, but I'm very interested. So a normal egg that you would want in ramen is gonna be kind of a medium boil, a little bit of softness still in the yolk. Because this is not a full boil, I have never cooked eggs like this before, but I'm very interested to see how they turn out. It said to simmer them for the last about 15 minutes, and that should give us a perfect tamago. All right, so our tare has been reducing down a little bit. I think it's about ready for us to move it into another container. So I'm just gonna pour it out here into a little bowl. This is going to keep fairly well in the fridge because of that extra salt content. We're also gonna have it available shortly for our ramen. And then I'm gonna rinse this bowl or this pot out, and then we're gonna use this to create the dashi for our incoming ramen. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left on our pork here. So we're gonna set up the broth for the ramen itself. So I'm gonna be taking my pork stock that I have here. Now, a lot of recipes will say to skim off the fat from the top, but then a lot of recipes that I was seeing also say to later add some fat back in. So I just didn't skim the fat off of these. It's gonna probably have a slightly higher fat content than intended, but at the same time, I really like that rich mouthfeel, and I think that having spent the time pulling all of that flavor and collagen out of the pork, that we might as well leave it in and let it have good texture too. All right, so we are going to put this on medium heat. We are going to add that piece of kombu that we have here, and we're just gonna let that come up to temperature. And then once again, right before we hit the boiling point, I'm gonna pull the kombu out to make sure we don't end up with any of that bitterness or sliminess. And then from there, we're gonna add the ginger and the garlic into it, and that's going to be our basis for the ramen broth. And aside from that, everything else is just gonna be toppings and putting together. So we are almost at the end of our excursion. 8.5 minutes, and then our pork will be done. All right, so we're gonna pull the kombu out of this as it is just coming to a boil right now. I'm gonna turn that down just a touch. And then our pork alarm has gone off. So we're gonna take these eggs here and move them into an ice bath. Now these should be, if they are following a standard kind of ramen tradition, somewhere around the medium boiled mark. We don't want them to be super hard boiled, and the yolk should still be a little jammy. But I've never done it with a simmering liquid before, so we're seeing how this goes. I moved it into an ice bath just to make sure that it stops cooking. And then we can actually take our pork here and pull this out of the braising liquid. Woo! And it is actually falling apart, so that's a good sign. Like I was saying, my twine fell apart earlier, but I think that actually did a good job of opening it up and making sure that all of the surface area was touching the braising liquid. Now, this is probably not going to be as pretty of a finished product as if we had done the rolled pork belly, because that allows you to get really nice slices that have a really good whirl to them. But I'm really not in any way, shape, or form worried about this being absolutely delicious, because all of the flavors should be there. It's been cooked long enough to be super, super tender, so it's not going to be the prettiest ramen, but I think it'll be delicious. All right, beautiful. We're gonna turn this down a bit. This we can turn off because we don't need to use the liquid anymore. Now, the liquid that's in here, you can actually keep this and put hard-boiled eggs in it and marinate them overnight and make even more of these sort of flavored aji tamago. I think that you should leave them in for at least 4 hours to get a real full traditional aji tamago. So these are gonna be somewhere off of that, but that's okay. We're going for something that we can put together in a day. All right, beautimous. So, let me check what I need to do, because I think the next thing we need to do is just boil the water here, get the noodles cooked, and then everything else is ready, because we have got this right here. We've got some flavorings. We're gonna add in that ginger and the garlic. That is going to be our broth base here. We've got our eggs, we've got the noodles, we've got the pork. All right, let me get this heating up so that we can get the noodles cooked up, and then I think we're almost ready for ramen time. Beautiful. Okay, so pork is done, pulled it off of the heat already. The broth has completed cooking. We've got the kombu out of it to make sure it doesn't get bitter or slimy. I've got the pork off to the side getting ready to be sliced, and I've boiled up some water right here, so now we get to make some noodles. Gonna be very, very easy. We're just gonna toss these in. And we're gonna wait until they rise to the top and then cook for a minute more. At least that was the instructions that I've been given so far. Give them a taste and see how they're at. If we want to add some more time, we can from there, but I think that about a minute should be good. I was a little worried that these were gonna stick together, but they are doing a good job of maintaining a good separation. So I think I should be able to just move them straight from here into the bowl, add some broth, add some toppings, and we'll have ramen. And hopefully it'll be delicious. And honestly, those did a really good job of cooking up. Eggs over here. Next bundle in. So something that I've run into when making noodles before is that oftentimes I'll run into the problem where the noodles really stick to each other if you've left them in a bundle like this. These have done an amazing job of maintaining their separation. I didn't use a whole lot of extra flour or cornstarch, but it's a very dry dough to start with, so I think that was helpful. But they did an amazing job of keeping separate, and I am very excited to see how these turn out in the final dish. Noodles! He had the noodle dream. All right. Perfect. So we've got a couple of bowls of our noodles here. All right, so now we just need to add a little bit of the broth on top here. And honestly, a better ladle would probably do a better job here, but that's okay. My Brontosaurus label is in the dishwasher. We'll make do with what we can. Do you know what? I believe in gravity. Now, in retrospect, I should have put the tare in the bottom of those bowls, so that way, when I poured the noodles and everything on top, mixed it all together. Hold that thought. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna put some tare in the bottom of the bowl before we move the stuff into it, because that makes sense. So we have our tare we made earlier. Now for this one, we just want a couple of teaspoons. So you don't want to go crazy with this. I'm just going to put a little bit in the bottom of the bowl, and then I'm going to pretend like I don't have another bowl ready for it. All right. Beautiful. And then this one here. Teaspoons to the bottom, adding some ramen to the top. And now, theoretically, we have shoyu tonkatsu ramen here, and shoyu tonkatsu ramen here. We're gonna put a little bit of the green onions and everything on top, just to make sure we've got some garnish and deliciousness, and then we are gonna be ready to eat. So, some of these off to the one side. Off to one side. We're gonna add some of the beni shoga. We're gonna add some of the beni shoga. 2 of our eggs, which I am just going to assume have been cooked enough because I have not done this method before. The good news is that it's peeling really well. I don't necessarily think that it's got the coloration. So aji tamago I've seen in the past have got a little bit of a dark brown color to them. But at the same time, I'm very interested to see how well it was cooked. So let me get a cut into this And we will see if we've got that sort of jammy medium boil. No. So these ones are absolutely hard-boiled eggs. If you want something more traditional, I would not recommend leaving them in for the 15 minutes to simmer. This is a beautiful hard-boiled egg, but it is in no way, shape, or form a medium boil. But we've got the aji tamago there, and the other aji tamago. Whatever I have to say about this cooking method, though, the ability to peel them is great. The shell just falls off. I've done hard-boiled eggs where I was trying to do hard-boiled egg and they didn't come nearly as close to this easy. All right, so we have Tonkatsu Ramen there, and then we're going to take a couple of pieces of our pork, which is not going to be super pretty, and I'm kind of okay with that. It is super delicious, though, as we've already tasted a few bites. So I'm going to put in our cooked pork. It's very, very tender. The braising did a great job of just making it fall apart, and the flavor has transferred into it deliciously. So we have got a little bit of pork, a little bit of egg, benishoga, onions, and that is our tonkotsu ramen. I am very excited to see how it turns out. All right, so it is time for us to try the ramen. We did try a little sample of the broth mixed with the tare, and already my mouth is watering.
So good.
And try a little bit, and he's like, I don't think I want to before everything's together. And I said, no, you really want to. So let's give it a try.
Here we go. Metal chopsticks.
Absolutely.
I was not expecting that. Here we go. It looks delicious. The egg does look a bit overdone for this kind of typical thing.
I do like that kind of jammy egg in a ramen one, so aji tamago usually has that less cookedness.
I don't typically like eggs anyway, so it honestly doesn't matter to me because I probably won't be eating it as is anyways.
All right.
Oof. I'm just kind of mixing it together because...
So literally just the broth and the tare together. I would have no problem with that being a meal. And I haven't even touched the other stuff in here. All right, let's go mix. Got a little bit of everything.
No, just the noodles. Just the noodles with the broth. Should get everything though. There we go. This is a good piece.
I'm very happy with the texture of the noodles.
Yes. I'm very happy with all of it. I have no complaints. This is fabulous.
And so I've had ramen before with char siu pork. I've never had it with the pork shoulder. And I have no complaints about it either. I was worried that the difference in fat content would significantly affect it, but tons of flavor. The pork shoulder has plenty of fat to it, even though I trimmed off some of the fat caps. All right, egg time.
I guess I'll give it a shot. For the fans.
It's a hard-boiled egg. That's what happened. I did not make aji tamago here. I'm going to be fully honest. Even though they were cooked in the basting liquid,
yeah, I'm not a fan.
The flavor did not come through to them at all. So the way that you would normally make these is you would hard-boil the eggs separately, and then you would put them in the braising liquid after it has cooled, and you would peel them so that they were completely exposed to the marinade, and then let them sit there for 3 to 4 hours or overnight, preferably. So what I'll probably do is I will probably take the remaining 2 eggs that I already cooked. I'm going to shell them, I'll put them in the braising liquid and put them in the fridge to make real aji tamago for the next batch, because these aren't it.
And that's okay, because the rest of it is it.
I'm very okay with the rest of this.
Yeah, I typically don't eat the egg in ramen either way, so this'll do.
But definitely, I was a little worried when I was making the broth because it didn't have a lot of salt to it, and it said that it should be kind of salty. But I was also watching a recipe that used the tare, and so some recipes do not use the tare at all. They have you add salt separately. I think that this is the way to go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because just imagine salt in that broth, it'd be okay, but this is spectacular.
Yeah, you also kind of make it modular so that you can just kind of mix and match whatever ingredients you want to make any kind of different recipes for your ramen. Then you'll just have enough for lots of ramen, but of all kinds of flavors.
And the tare that I made, it can last in the fridge for quite a long time, so I'm just going to keep that bowl that I made earlier in the fridge, and if we ever wanted to make ramen again, that entire recipe can be skipped. You can just throw the broth together. I mean, I would probably buy the noodles, although these noodles are really good. But, I mean, this is really good. Yeah. It's not quite the explosion of different flavors that the okonomiyaki was, because that one was almost overwhelming. But this one I feel is more balanced, and at the same time, I feel very happy with it because I knew what I was going into, and this is sort of the area that I was expecting.
Yeah. They all came together beautifully into like a single sound in a symphony instead of just a bunch of different instruments playing like the okonomiyaki was, which they all came together in harmony.
Right, but there was still so many.
There were so many.
You could 100% be like, that's what I'm tasting here. This one, if you were to give me this broth,
you might be able to pick out the ginger because it pokes through a bit.
But I would
that everything blends so naturally,
spectacularly. Oh.
Yes. Well, I guess that's it for this one.
I don't remember what's next. Next is step 3 in Japan. It's another Japanese dish for sure. I just don't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I'm very excited for it because so far Japan has been very different from France and Italy in very good ways.
And all delicious, without exception.
So I'll see you next time, and enjoy your ramen if you give it a try. What is I think it's itadakimasu. There we go. Itadakimasu.